gentlemen, we're going to begin momentarily. If you could ask everyone to find a seat, we're going to begin momentarily. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Boca Raton Synagogue. My name is Efrem Goldberg. I have the privilege of serving as one of the rabbis here. And what an honor to welcome you all for an extraordinary evening, to stand together in celebration of Israel, to advance and advocate for the U.S.-Israel relationship, to honor and to thank heroes of the United States, Israel, and the Jewish people, like Ambassador David Friedman, who are here. Thank you so much for being here. And our other dignitaries and guests who will welcome throughout the evening. What an evening. What a turnout, what a crowd. What a statement each and every one of you are making tonight by being here. In the rain, in challenging times, confronting tension, and you are here. We are here, united together as one to stand with Israel. I want to begin by thanking and welcoming Pastor Mario Bramnick and the Latino Coalition for Israel. Many years ago, I met Pastor Bramnick. We were both in the waiting room of a congresswoman's office, waiting to meet with her and to lobby her on an issue. He introduced himself. I'm a rabbi, he's a pastor. I imagined we were there for very different reasons. But when we compared notes and topics, it turned out we were there to advance the very same cause: Israel's safety and security. I made a friend that day in that waiting room, and has been a friend since. And let me be unequivocally clear, Israel and the Jewish community are fortunate to have the friendship of Pastor Mario Bramnick of the Latino Coalition for Israel. We have worked together several times since that original meeting, never about religion, never debating God or the Bible, always exclusively about Israel, the safety and security of our brothers and sisters there, her right to not only exist but to thrive. For that and so much more, we are so grateful and welcome. I want to thank many individuals who coordinated. It's not easy to put a night like this together. Rabbi Moskowitz for his hard work and leadership and partnership. Rabbi, thank you for everything. Our COO, Rabbi Goldberg, thank you for your hard work. Our volunteer security chair and all the security committee, the volunteers, David Berger and our volunteers, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you, Talia, for your hard work and giving your special touch to tonight to make it just right. Thank you to our custodial staff who worked tirelessly, and to Choni, and to everybody who worked hard. I want to offer a very special thank you. It's all right, you can clap. And lastly, a thank you to our partners, to whom we are so indebted, in the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, our local law enforcement, who not only tonight, friends, tonight is a high-profile event with high-profile people. It has gotten a lot of attention, and our local law enforcement have been extraordinary. They always are ready to run to the problems, not away. We stand with you, we thank you, we're so grateful for all that you do for us on a regular basis. Thank you so much. I want to thank our sponsors, co-sponsors made this evening possible. Combating Anti-Semitism Movement, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Duty Free America, the Falak Family, Tamar and Jorge Waldenberg Family Philanthropic Fund, the Diener family, Bob Diener, who will be on Behind the Bima this week, Richard Steinberg, and all those who supported the VIP reception and enabled this amazing evening to happen. I also want to take a personal moment to thank two dear friends, my Rebbe, my teacher, Rabbi Schechter, two of his sons, Rabbi Shai and Yami Schechter, who surprised us and made it here tonight to stand with us and to show support for Israel and for this event. It means the absolute world that you are here. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for all that you do. This time, please rise for the national anthems as we welcome Chazan singing sensation Yedidya Chayat.
So gallantly
you, Shimmy Kamenetsky.
All right.
Thank you, Shimmy Kamenetsky. We're incredibly blessed here in the great state of Florida to have elected officials. I could stop the sentence right there. But we are blessed in our great state of Florida to have elected officials who don't just get it about Israel. They are distinguished leaders on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Our very own Congressman Ted Deutsch is a pro-Israel hero. That's right. Congressman Deutsch has authored and led countless pieces of legislation on Israel. He doesn't just talk about it, he walks the walk, and he influences policy. He has spoken out against anti-Semitism, and he works every day in Congress to advance the U.S.-Israel relationship in ways many of us know, and in ways, many more ways we will never know. He couldn't be here this evening, but he sends his warmest wishes and greetings. We want to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to him for all that he does on this issue that we care so much about. We're so grateful for the leadership of our Governor Ron Desantis. Take a moment, as we know, the First Lady of our state. His wife is currently fighting illness. I believe she's in the hospital, and we offer a prayer for her recovery, well-being, speedy, complete, and painless. Our Governor Ron Desantis, our Senators Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, they all get it on Israel. How lucky, how fortunate, how blessed are we? All three have each been at Israel's side throughout their political careers and throughout their private lives. We're honored tonight to have video greetings from Governor DeSantis and from Senator Scott. Please pay attention to the screens.
Hi, I'm Senator Rick Scott. I'm honored to join you at the South Florida Night to celebrate Israel with Ambassador Friedman. Florida has maintained a strong relationship with Israel for many generations, and it has been honored to represent our great state as we strengthen that bond. Israel is a strong democracy that supports capitalism, champions human rights, and holds free and open elections. As a great ally and the only shining example of democracy in the Middle East, Israel deserves America's full support. As Florida's U.S. Senator, I am so proud of our state's strong Jewish communities and will continue to work every day to protect and support Israel and the Jewish people and fight to take actions against those who wish to do them harm. Thank you and have a great event.
Hello, I'm Governor Ron Desantis, and I want to thank Rabbi Synagogue for hosting this incredible event with Pastor Mario Bramnick and the Latino Coalition for Israel. I'd like to be with you all in person this evening, but I am delivering the State of the State speech as we open our 2022 legislative session here in the state of Florida. In attendance for the speech was Yehuda Topper, Florida's first ever Orthodox Jewish Shomer Shabbat police officer. He recently moved to South Florida from the New York Police Department and is both a pro-Israel and pro-law enforcement governor. I'm gratified that he decided to make the Sunshine State his home. Throughout my entire time in public service, I have championed a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. As Congressman, I took the news and embassy to Jerusalem, traveled to Israel to scout out potential embassy locations, and attended the Jerusalem Embassy opening ceremony in May of 2018. 1 year later, as governor, I led a trade mission to Israel, during which I met with then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, visited Israel's biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria, and prayed at the Western Wall. My visit to Israel also strengthened academic and business ties between the Jewish state and the Sunshine State. We recently fortified a partnership between Space Florida and Israel with $1 million in recurring funds for collaborative research, development, and commercialization of aerospace projects. And this past summer, during an algae bloom in Lake Okeechobee, we had an Israeli company that participated in the trade mission come to Florida to deploy innovative technology. We've also been the forefront of fighting back against the anti-Semitic boycott, divest, and sanction movement. When I first came into office, Airbnb was taking part in BDS with its removal of listings in Judea and Samaria, so we put them on our list of scrutinized companies that target Israel, and very shortly thereafter, Airbnb backed down. The state of Florida is standing up for the safety and security of the Jewish community here in Florida. We created new Holocaust education standards to ensure that the history of the Holocaust is taught accurately in our K-12 schools. And we provided $4 million in security funding for Florida's Jewish day schools and funding for security at synagogues. The world's oldest hatred, that is anti-Semitism, has no place in Florida. And as governor, I'll always do whatever is necessary to combat anti-Semitism. The partner to see two of Florida's fastest growing communities come together in support of our ally, Israel, and it is great to see two patriotic Florida residents, Ambassador David Friedman and Ben Shapiro, sharing the stage for a night to celebrate the Jewish state. God bless the state of Florida, and God bless the state of Israel.
Never take it for granted. We all have friends who live elsewhere. Our elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, left and right, here in Florida, they get it. It's in large part a tribute to you, to us, to our advocacy. It's among the many things that we should count our blessings for each and every day. Friends, we all know and lament that the narrative about Israel keeps getting even more and ever more distorted. Descriptions of Israel as an apartheid state couldn't be further from the truth. If you go to Israel and you see the Arab representation in the elected leadership, in the Supreme Court, the police force and the army, BDS, the false claim it's about civil rights, when we know it's about economic warfare against Israel's existence. The intersectional canard that Israel-Palestinian conflict has anything to do with U.S. civil rights issues. Reprehensible charge that Israel trains U.S. police how to apply repressive measures against minorities. The UN Human Rights Council, its new standing committee, the list goes on and on of those things that our enemies manufacture, distort, the lies, the slander, to try to undermine the safety, the security, the future of our beloved homeland. Israel faces enemies. Hezbollah to the north, Hamas to the south, and Iran only too close. Israel has many enemies. But this is not the first group of enemies that we, the Jewish people, have ever faced. Since our very inception, we have been persecuted and oppressed. We have been fighting for our right to even exist. The Torah portion Jews will read in synagogues around the world this weekend describes finally when we were liberated and freed from Egypt, when we were running for our lives, we found ourselves stuck, not between the proverbial, literally between the rock and the hard place, the Egyptians behind us and the sea before us. The Jewish people did what they were trained to do. They did what they thought was the right thing to do. They began to pray. They turned to God and they said, save us. Make a miracle happen. And Moses, God's mouthpiece, turns to them and he says, Ma titzak elai, what are you doing? Close the Psalms, close the prayer books. Stop praying, what are you doing? Yisou, start walking. Stop praying and start walking. Moses tells them, take action. Show movement. Take initiative. Friends, we have to find a balance in our lives always between prayer and activity. Between faith by being passive and a faith that inspires activism. God wants us to pray not only with our lips, He wants us to pray with our hands and our feet. He wants us to pray with our deeds. He wants us to pray with what we do and the difference that we make. God invites us and wants us to be His partner, to put our skin in the game, to sometimes close that prayer book and start walking. Start moving. taking initiative and making a difference. God welcomes and wants those prayers. They're invaluable. Of course, we cherish and we continue to pray. But we have to know that accompanying that prayer, there must be action. It's not good enough to be anguished and to share emails with one another. It's not good enough to post or to like or dislike on social media. It's not good enough to sit around your Shabbos table or any other meal and bemoan the plight of Israel or the condition of the Jewish people. It's not good enough to even just pray. We have to make our voices heard and we have to take action. We have to show movement. We have to answer that invitation and be God's partner. To make our voices heard, to stand up and to make a difference. And we need all the help we get in that journey of making a difference. Jews and non-Jews alike, decent people everywhere who stand for the values and ideals that we cherish, who defend the Jewish people and the one Jewish state, the state of Israel. We welcome that partnership, that initiative, that work, and that effort. We cherish it and we are deeply grateful for it. People have different resources. And you can take action in many different ways. There's no shortage. There's a diverse list of organizations and activities to not just sit back and forward or share emails, to not only bemoan an article you read, but to make a difference. It could be political involvement. Through AIPAC, who's made an amazing pivot and begun a PAC, and now we can use our voices and resources to make sure that our elected officials represent and stand for what we care about and what we believe. For others, it'll be letters to the editor of broadcast media, Camera, and Stand With Us, ZOA, and countless other organizations that get it. They're on the right side of this issue, and they're waiting for you. They're waiting for you to get involved, to not just talk to people or even to the Almighty, but to act, to make a difference. Every member of Congress will tell you that when there's pending legislation or rocket attacks that the IDF responds to, every member of Congress will tell you that when they speak out and defend Israel, they receive a torrent of anti-Israel email. The courage that they have to have. Congressman Torres from the Bronx will be our guest in just a few weeks. Self-described a liberal progressive, but staunchly standing with Israel. And when he's paid a price. You can't imagine the flurry that our friends get when they do the right thing. And they'll tell you that it's equally imperative that they receive a greater amount of pro-Israel email so they can respond and tell their critics what they're hearing, so their staff can see why they represent and what they represent, what they do. So don't take for granted, they vote like us, they get it, they care about it. I don't need to send an email or make a phone call. You know, Israel's nightmare scenario, God forbid, is that the Iron Dome is overwhelmed by Hezbollah and Hamas rockets simultaneously. You know, the Iron Dome replenishment legislation passed the House 420-9. And even those who are not Israel's fans voted for it in many cases. And you know why they did? Because they had constituents in Riverdale and New Rochelle and other places like that who made it clear what they expect and how they'll hold them accountable. If we want to protect the people of Israel, and I would argue you want to protect the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, because if Israel doesn't have Iron Dome, like any other country in the world that has an obligation to defend its citizens, it's not the Israelis who would pay the price when they have the IDF fighting on their behalf. It is the innocent civilians in Gaza who are used as shields. Iron Dome is not a gift for Israel, it's a gift to the Palestinians of Gaza. And if we want to see the protection and security of innocent people on both sides, you can't take for granted those votes of members of Congress. We have to get involved. Iron Dome is the product of an annual appropriation, hundreds of millions of dollars for joint missile defenses. And if not for that appropriation, Iron Dome might not exist. So I want to close my remarks by giving all of us a piece of homework tonight. Something every person can do while you're sitting here during my speech, don't do it during anyone else's, or as soon as you leave. It's something near and dear to our heart because the mother of the person I'm about to talk to you about has been to our community and spoke. She's appeared on our podcast Behind the Bima. And to hear a mother's heartfelt pleas who wants closure, who wants to grieve, who doesn't want much, she wants a very basic dignity. In August 2014, during the war, Israel and Hamas Just 2 hours after Hamas agreed to a ceasefire that was sponsored by the United States and the United Nations, Hamas terrorists emerged from a terror tunnel and they shot Hadar Golden, a lieutenant in the Israeli Defense Forces, and they killed 2 other Israeli soldiers. Hadar Golden, Hashem Yikom Damo, did not survive the attack. 2014, and Hamas continues to unjustly, to against international law, to against every human right, they continue to hold the body of Hadar and the body of another soldier that was killed in that conflict, Oron Shaul. They're holding those bodies for ransom. Hamas is also holding 2 Israeli civilians, Aviram Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed. 7 years have passed. How long do a mother and a father and siblings need to wait to go to the funeral of a loved one who is serving his country, who is serving in the army, protecting the people behind him? Is 7 years not long enough to wait to go to his funeral, to mourn and to grieve his loss, to have closure for that terrible tragedy? 7 years have passed and they are still struggling to obtain that release. As I said, against international law and all human rights, nobody can defend Hamas holding on to those bodies. Now, currently there's a huge aid package to rebuild Gaza making its way through Congress. The current administration supporting, raising the levels of support for the Palestinians. And those families have called upon us, and I turn and call upon you. This is your homework for tonight. That any U.S. aid packages earmarked for the reconstruction of Gaza must be conditioned on the return of Hadar and Oron. Those boys and those bodies coming back must be a non-negotiable precondition to any aid being sent. The Gaza package will be awarded only after Hamas returns our boys. It's a moral imperative. It's a basic moral imperative. And you can make a difference. Because Congress is going to vote on that aid. And Congress has the ability to make it conditioned. And they'll do it if they hear from you. They'll do it if they know that we, their constituents, care. They'll do if they know that their political career depends on it. So don't just sit here tonight and clap and celebrate all worthy recipients of it. But when you leave here, in addition to continuing to pray for Israel and the Jewish people, as God through Moses told them standing at the sea, start moving. Start taking action. Build some momentum. Start walking and making a difference on this issue and others. And in that merit, may God make the sea split to bring these boys home. May God bless the state of Israel and the people of Israel. Privileged tonight to have one of our co-sponsors, the Wiesenthal Center. Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein, a dear friend, is the co-founder of Cross Currents, an online journal of Jewish thought. He's the editorial board of Klal Perspectives. And importantly, Rabbi Adlerstein is the director of the Interfaith Affairs at the Wiesenthal Center. Please turn your attention to the screens once again for short greetings.
Good evening, dear friends. Simon Wiesenthal, the voice of the 6 million murdered by the Nazis and through the indifference of the world that looked on, lost 89 members of his family in the Holocaust. He was a graduate of some of the worst extermination camps. He therefore knew a thing or two about anti-Semitism. He argued that it could never be defeated by Jews acting on their own. They would need new friends and new allies to prevail. Simon could not have known that the Jewish state that was created by the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu would also need new friends and new allies in order to survive and to miraculously flourish. I bring you greetings from the 400,000 member families of the great human rights organization named for him, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. We have proudly worked with Christian friends and allies for over 20 years. We learned about changes in parts of the Christian community that our grandparents never would have believed. We listened as skeptics who had no problem themselves dissociating from the security of the Jewish state, nonetheless warn, stay away from evangelicals. They endanger Israel because they only care for their own extremist agenda. They don't care about peace or Israel's safety. They will resist any movement to get closer to Muslims. And we saw that lie blown out of the water as evangelicals enthusiastically worked with us to further peace in the Middle East over 10 years on the road to the Abraham Accords. May God confer his blessing upon all who work for the security of the state of Israel and who join together, despite irreconcilable theological differences, to work for a better world and the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zacharias. V'hoya Hashem l'melech al kol ha'aretz, bayom hahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shemo echad. God will be king over the entire earth. On that day, God will be one, and his name will be one. God bless you, and thank you.
God bless you all. Rabbi Goldberg, Boca Raton Synagogue, friends that are joining today, it is truly an honor to be here. I want to thank Rabbi Goldberg and the synagogue for your incredible hospitality in co-hosting tonight's event. Rabbi Goldberg, thank you for being a visionary. Thank you for your leadership, for being a pillar and pioneer in the pro-Israel movement. In today's society, I don't want to talk about wokeness, it's hard to find leadership with moral clarity, with courage and strength to speak the truth in the midst of a sea of lies. And Rabbi, you are that type of leader that is a leader with moral clarity in this day. In the last decade, we have seen historic alliances of Christian and Jewish communities together to protect the legitimacy, the security, and prosperity of the nation of Israel. Our first night to celebrate Israel, maybe 14 years ago at Nova Southeastern University, with then Deputy Foreign Minister, a dear friend of ours, Danny Ayalon, who was Ambassador of Israel to the United States, said, "There is more that unites us than that which divides us." Colonel Ben Gerber, former colonel of the IDF, said, "Today Israel is in a much better strategic place than in 1948. Number one, because of the strength and ability of the IDF, the foremost military in the world, and number two, because of the Christian friends of Israel." Because of the efforts of the Evangelical Faith Council to President Trump, they were instrumental in helping counsel the president and the administration in his pro-Israel policy, including the historic recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. I had the honor of working with Ambassador Friedman and Jason Greenblatt on the Republican Party platform Language on Israel, which designated Jerusalem as the undivided capital of the nation of Israel and called for the move of the embassy. I had the honor of being with Ambassador Friedman at the Jerusalem Embassy inauguration, and LCI hosted an event with the ambassador. Finally, the United States policy was in line with the American people and in line with biblical mandate that Jerusalem is and will always be the capital of the nation of Israel. We are living in unprecedented times. I don't need to tell you, you don't need to be prophetic to see it. These unprecedented times require unprecedented strategic alliances. The United States' Christian support of Israel is now more important than at any other time in the history of our nation. Winston Churchill believed Jews were unique and they played a special role in world history. Churchill discerned God's involvement in Jewish destiny. In 1905 in Manchester, as he protested Russian anti-Semitic pogroms, Churchill condemned the persecution and warned Russia. And today from Florida, we warn any leader in the United States. Churchill said, "The Lord deals with nations as nations deal with Israel." We must never waver on our unequivocal support of the nation of Israel, not just because of the biblical mandate, but because of the geopolitical importance of Israel being the greatest ally to Israel. And we're in grave concern of all the great, amazing advancements under Ambassador Friedman. I was going to say this in his introduction, and the work of President Trump, we have seen the most historic movement in Israel, for Israel, than any prior administration. This night to celebrate Israel is a solidarity event between Christians and Jews. This event commemorates the unconditional support of Christians and Jews throughout the world for the protection, security, and continual existence of the nation of Israel, for the protection of the Jewish people, fighting bigotry and discrimination. Through prayers for Israel, through political activism in support of the nation of Israel, through rallies and activism in combating anti-Semitism and standing against the BDS movement. This night to celebrate Israel, as well as the work of our Latino Coalition for Israel, is not conversionary, nor is it for proselytizing. I remember the first time I met with Jason Greenblatt at the Trump International in New York when he was first appointed with David Friedman as the campaign advisors for Israel. And I told him that Israel is number 3 priority for evangelicals for voting. And the reason it is because the Bible clearly says in the Hebrew Scriptures in Genesis 12:1-3, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel shall be cursed. That has not changed to this day. And it is so important. Our unity, and as the rabbi said, our marching forward is so critical. Our voice and our unity does make a difference. That we will stand, and America shall never back up against its friend Israel. Our LCI has mobilized Hispanics in the U.S. and Latin America in the pro-Israel movement. We've been working for 14 years in the pro-Israel movement. I had the honor of meeting 10 heads of state. I met with the president of Honduras, President Hernandez 3 times, and they recently moved their embassy to Jerusalem. The president of Guatemala, Brazil, we're continuing to work strongly in Latin America. The Jewish people throughout their history have suffered great injustices and persecution. We understand 2,000 years of persecution, much of which was from the Christian church. And that is something that we come and must recognize and repent for 2,000 years of the forefathers persecuting Jewish people against God's will and against God's word. In the last several years, we've seen a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism here in America. The squad is calling for the cutting of U.S. military to Israel and sanctioning Israel. Representative Omar accused Israel of terrorism following deadly airstrikes in Gaza. Anti-Semitism has no place in the Congress of the United States of America. Anyone who slanders those who support the historic alliance between U.S. and Israel should not be in Congress, let alone in any foreign affairs committee. We need to adopt a zero-tolerance approach to this new wave of anti-Semitism in America. Anti-Semitism and BDS are not just anti-Jewish, they're anti-Christian, they're anti-American, and anti-Western, driven by an unholy alliance between radical progressive leftists, radical Islamists, and radical neo-Nazis who hate our Judeo-Christian values that have been the foundation of our nation. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to understand this. Not everyone's going to support the Christian-Jewish alliances. There are Christians that oppose what we're doing here tonight. There are Jewish people that oppose what we're doing here tonight. But I need to tell you, when God moves strategically and significantly, opposition usually rises. I tell my congregation, if you're not going through some type of opposition, maybe you're not doing the right thing. We've heard about King Cyrus a lot lately. In the 70-year Babylonian captivity, King Cyrus rose and was a friend. A Persian king was a friend of the Jewish people and told the Jewish people to go back to rebuild Jerusalem. We're living in a very similar time. And Ezra built the temple. Nehemiah asked the king for the welfare of Jerusalem, and the king said, "Go and bless Jerusalem." But the minute Nehemiah started building walls of protection over Israel, the opposition of Sanballat and Tobiah arose to stop the work. They mocked. They gave false accusations. They even questioned Nehemiah's motives to the king. They said, "Oh, he wants to bring some sort of uprising." No, he just wanted to help build a wall of protection for the Jewish people. We are here today to build a wall of protection for Israel, to build a wall of protection for the Jewish people, and to build a wall of protection for the Christian Israel, U.S.-Israel alliance. Nehemiah encouraged the builders to stay on the wall. God will give us success. And I tell you today, God will give us success. We will arise and we will rebuild. Our mutual enemies don't discriminate. They are targeting both Christians and Jews in Europe, in the Middle East, and here in America. We're feeling, as well as a Christian community, persecution and cancel culture in a way we've never experienced before, just akin to the rise of anti-Semitism in America. Rabbi Goldberg and Boca Raton Synagogue and the Jewish community are building on one side of the wall. The Christians are building on another side. And Nehemiah said, "I will blow the shofar. And when I blow the shofar, those building the wall of protection for Israel shall unite." When you hear the sound of the shofar, tonight we are releasing the sound of the shofar, uniting together, that we will stand for Israel, that Israel lives now and forever, that God blesses the nation of Israel. It is a great honor to introduce our next friend and a dear friend of Israel. Ellie Cohanim is a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, host of a weekly show, Global Perspectives with Ellie Cohanim, for JNS Jewish News Syndicated. She previously served as U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the United States State Department by appointment of President Donald Trump and the U.S. Secretary of State. Mrs. Cohanim was the first State Department, first Iranian-born envoy, and led diplomatic initiatives leading to amazing historic initiatives, including working with the Abrahamic Accords. Let us welcome our dear friend, Ellie Cohanim. Please join us.
So I had a lovely family ski trip right before I came here, and I think you all can see where that ended. But Ambassador David Friedman saw me and he said, "Don't you know Persian Jews are not allowed to go skiing?" But you know what? No injury was going to stop me from joining you tonight, and so I want to thank you. So I'm going to try my best to stand, but if I can, I'll sit. So first of all, my deepest thanks to Apostle Mario Bramnick, who you just heard from. Thank you for that kind introduction. I had the honor of meeting the Apostle when I was a Deputy Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism for the U.S. State Department. And even then, the first time that we met, the Apostle said to me, "Ellie, the Jewish people are not alone. We are beside you." And every day and every moment that I've spent working with the Apostle Mario Bramnick, I have learned that he is beside us and that the Christian faith community are beside us. So thank you so much, Mario. What an honor to share the stage tonight with Ambassador David Friedman. Not only can I say with full confidence that Ambassador Friedman is the best ambassador of the United States of America to Israel that we've ever had, but a man who brought peace to Israel and peace to the Middle East, and so the story is continued. You know, we are waiting to see the benefits of peace that we've been seeing every single day since then. I also want to thank our host, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, this incredible shul, for having us tonight. And I know we're all excited for Ben Shapiro. So on this family vacation that we were on, we got some time spent together. And my older son turned to me and he said, "Mom, why do they hate us?" And I think it's the question that Jews have asked each other for millennia. Why do they hate us? Now, I'm not particularly interested in getting into the mind of a hater, but here are some facts for all of us to consider regarding Jews. Abraham, our father, is acknowledged by all traditions to be the father of monotheism. Abraham brought to the world the concept of a God and a creator, and this was at a time when the people around him were worshiping stars and trees and statues. With the growth of Abraham's family, we have the growth of Judaism and an entire religion that's based on law, justice, ethics, and morals. Very quickly, and in every society that the Jew has ever lived, the Jew became the moral conscience of that society. And many hated the Jew, and to this day hate the Jew, for bringing God, morality, ethics into the conversation, when often the haters want to build societies that are premised on power, pure and simple. In today's world, those who are seeking to wield power often cloak themselves in the mantle of social justice, and they're building a certain narrative which we see is gaining ground more and more every day. That is the accusation that Jews are white, privileged neo-colonialists, and that Israel is a white, neo-colonialist apartheid state settled by ethnic and privileged white Jews who are to this day oppressing the brown-skinned rightful inhabitants of the land. And this is the lens that we find more and more young Americans, Jewish and non-Jewish, are perceiving Israel and events in Israel. Never was this narrative, which seeks to demonize Jews and demonize Israel, more powerful and widespread than in the recent May 2020 conflict, when Hamas rained down 4,000 rockets at Israeli cities and civilian population centers. And while this war was being waged against Israel, we witnessed a torrent of propaganda, lies, and slanderous accusations lobbied at Israel by major social media influencers, by members of the US Congress, and by Western media outlets, which together meant that Israel was simultaneously fighting an actual military war on its home front and a PR war in the international arena. Now, I want to pause for a moment and state that when I had the privilege of serving our great country in the Trump administration, our administration's policy was that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. And the reason why you heard that from President Trump, Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, from Ambassador David Friedman, and everyone down the line was because we knew full well that the hatred of the Jew among nations is no less vile than the hatred of the Jew. Now, going back to the most recent May Gaza conflict, what we saw was that this PR war, this TikTok intifada, which was being waged against Israel, had two prongs of attack. The first prong was what the Jerusalem Post reported, a coordinated effort to slander and troll Israeli personalities on social media. Aviv Lusky, who's the CEO of a digital company for Israeli celebrities, said, quote, "This is the most extreme situation we've ever seen in terms of the number of anti-Israel responses. We're losing big time in this war when it comes to our image. The pro-Palestinian side has millions more hashtag supporters than we do." The second prong of the TikTok intifada was a rather long list of international celebrities and social media influencers who jumped into the fray to support Hamas and the Palestinians. Most notable were the Palestinian supermodel sisters Gigi and Bella Hadid, who together have almost 100 million followers on Instagram. The State of Israel's official Twitter account responded to a now notorious video in which Bella Hadid posted herself joining a crowd of protesters in Brooklyn where they were chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." It should be noted that what Ms. Hadid is actually calling for is genocide against the Jews because Israel holds 8 million Jews in her land. And the celebrity pylon continued from there. We saw pop stars, movie stars, comedians, people like Dua Lipa, Trevor Noah, Natalie Portman, Lena Headey, Roger Waters, all posting on their social media against Israel. And over in Pakistan, we saw Bollywood actress Veena Malik post a tweet where she was quoting Hitler, and she wrote, "I would have killed all the Jews of the world, but I kept some to show the world why I killed them." And last but not least was BLM, Black Lives Matter, weighed in, saying, quote, "It stands in solidarity with Palestinians." And to go on, they state, "We are a movement committed to ending settler colonialism in all forms, and we will continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation." The Marxist-inspired group added with the hashtag, hashtag Free Palestine. And so we saw a deluge of the most vicious anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, and pro-Palestinian sentiments on social media, influencing millions of people around the world. The mainstream media coverage of these events was also skewed against Israel, with none other than the New York Times dedicating their front page with a headline, quote, "They were just children," with individual pictures of Palestinian children whom the New York Times claims were killed in that conflict, presumably by Israel. Within hours of the front page story, activists like Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, who I retweeted, found at least one of the photos was a fake. He wrote, quote, "It's literally a random photo from cute Muslim toddlers, online photo stocks that have been circulating for many years." The next day, the Times issued a correction on the individual photo of that child, but issued no retraction or took any more serious responsibility for what they did. Meanwhile, the Jerusalem-based organization NGO Monitor reported that the Times front page story was based on information received from a Palestinian NGO with ties to the terrorist organization Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. You can't make this stuff up. Now let's turn our attention to members of the US Congress. The so-called squad coordinated their attacks on Israel during the May conflict, with Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Cori Bush tweeting, quote, "Apartheid states aren't democracies." Tlaib repeatedly accused Israel of, quote-unquote, apartheid, and Ilhan Omar accused Israel of committing, quote, acts of terrorism. for defending Israeli citizens. Now, we all know that soon after the May conflict, Tlaib, Omar, and Ocasio-Cortez blocked funding in Congress for the restocking of Israel's defensive Iron Dome system. Here is where this narrative against Jews in Israel got to be very personal for American Jewry. For a long time now, we have unfortunately gotten used to a pattern in Europe where events would take place, a conflict would take place between Israel and the Palestinians, and then Jews were attacked on the streets of London and Berlin and Paris. We never, prior to this conflict this last May, experienced that same pattern, but we did here in America for the first time in our history as American Jews. For the first time in our history as American Jews, there were Palestinian flag waving mobs who drove through Los Angeles and New York, and they were looking for Jews to beat up. And you know what? When they found those Jews, they got out of their cars and they started to physically attack those Jews. This happened all over the US. We also found our synagogues under attack in places like Skokie, Illinois, Salt Lake City, Utah, and Tucson, Arizona. Here's what I can tell you. And also, I want to mention Bal Harbour, Miami. Right here, there was a family walking home from shul on Shabbat. Car drives by, and they shout at the family, "Free Palestine, die Jew, F you Jew, and I'm going to rape your wife." Eventually, the driver witnessed this attack. He was armed, and he managed to get these people to leave this Jewish family alone. My friends, this is where I turn to you. Confronting anti-Semitism is difficult, but here's the reality. There is also a no more noble cause in the world than to stand with the Jew, and that is what each of you are here tonight doing. Thank you. You are here standing with your Jewish neighbors here in the US, and you're standing by the Jew among nations, and that is the Jewish state of Israel. And truly, as I look at my children and the future that they will inherit, I am optimistic for them, and here are the reasons why. This last year, I traveled 2 times to Latin America with the Latino Coalition for Israel, and with Apostle Mario Bramnick, with some other friends who are here in the audience tonight. And we went together to Guatemala. Guatemala, the first country to move their embassy to Jerusalem after the United States. And we met with the brave leaders of that country. But also we met with the spiritual leaders and the faith leaders, the people who are the moral compass of the decision makers. And it was the same experience on a recent visit to Brazil that I undertook with the Latino Coalition for Israel, where again, we met with the most senior levels of the government, and we were hosted by one of the largest churches in Brazil. And that is where, again, I felt the love for the Jewish people, the love for Jerusalem, and the love for the Jewish state of Israel. And what I can tell you is that the world is truly a safer place for the work of Latino Coalition for Israel. I also want to take a moment to mention one of the co-sponsors of our gathering tonight, Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, which is the largest umbrella organization bringing people of every faith together to fight global anti-Semitism. And what I want to make clear is that we're living in a moment when there are forces that want to destroy God. They want to destroy the family unit. They want to destroy our basic understanding of what is a female and what is a male. And in this moment, when our most basic values as Americans and as people of faith are under attack, at this moment we have to come together. And so I ask you this: the next time that Israel is under attack, which inevitably she will be, will you go on your social media and ask your children and ask your children's friends and your church group and everyone you're on a group text message, will you ask them to go on their social media and to stand with Israel? And when Israel needs our help in Congress, will you pick up the phone and let your member of Congress know that you want them to stand with Israel? And tonight when you go home, when you go online, I would like everyone to do what Rabbi Efrem asked, which is to let their members of Congress know that any funding for Gaza needs to be predicated on releasing the 2 Jewish bodies of our 2 Israeli soldiers. And also, please go online and sign the pledge to combat anti-Semitism at combatantisemitismmovement.org. Because, as you heard earlier, this is the moment when we need our Christian friends to stand with us. And this is the moment that we need every Jew to get her voice heard. And now today is when we need to unite, we need to join forces and remind the world that we believe in our common humanity. We believe in a world with God, and that we believe. Thank you so much.
Please give your attention to our Chazan once again, who's going to put us all in the mood and get us ready for our keynote speaker.
אווירים צלול כיין וריח אורני נישא ברוח הארבעים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובלבה
want something happy. Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Goldberg.
Okay, special for Rabbi Goldberg. Odiamo shalom aleinu. Ay, odiamo shalom aleinu. Odiamo shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol ha'am. Odiamo shalom aleinu. Odiamo shalom aleinu. Odiamo shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol ha'am. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, shalom. Shalom aleinu, odiamo shalom aleinu, odiamo shalom aleinu, salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam, salam, salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam, salam.
So I had known that Ambassador David Friedman was the best ambassador to Israel that America ever had. I never knew he could dance. We are so honored, truly, tonight to have Ambassador David Friedman with us in the house. Ambassador Friedman's exemplary leadership helped shape history. With the movement of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, the declaration of Golan Heights as sovereignty of the nation of Israel. Under Ambassador Friedman's leadership, the Trump administration has done more for Israel than any other administration in the history of America. He was among a small group of American officials responsible for the Abrahamic Accords, peace and normalization between Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, for which he was nominated with the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. I remember the times that we would speak. I could not keep up with Ambassador Friedman going from one level to another level in support of Israel. He has been recognized as one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world. He came in #2 in 2019 and tied for first place in 2020. Ambassador Friedman was honored by President Trump with the National Security Medal in September 2020. Let us welcome Ambassador David Friedman.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, it's so great to be here. A little out of breath from that dancing, but hopefully it'll come back to me. Tammy and I we're so excited to be here with all of you incredible people. Really, what all you do for Israel, you're the warm feelings you have, the commitment you have, and really most importantly, the prayers that you have for the state of Israel are so important. And look, every democracy reflects the will of its people. And as communities like this, outstanding communities like this, show their support for Israel, it does resonate and it does make Israel a safer, more prosperous, more secure place. So thank all of you, really deeply appreciate it. My thanks to my friend Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, who has built such a really magnificent synagogue and community within Boca Raton. You know, I'm from New York, and I'm sure some of you are as well, and I'm sure, I can't imagine any of you are regretting your decision to move down here. We're certainly not. But you know, New York is the second largest Jewish community in the world. I mean, just think about it. New York all by itself is the second largest community in the world after Israel. Now, that's good. There's certain good things about that. But you know, where I lived, you know, every time I leave home and come back, there was another shul. Every 6, 7 weeks, there was another shul. And you know, I guess there's something to be said for that. But there's also something to be said for a community in which literally every single person I met here, I didn't know anybody in Boca Raton until about a few months ago when 2 of our kids moved to Boca Raton, the smartest thing either one of them ever did. So we have 6 grandchildren here, and you know, we come now more often, and what an incredible community. You know, everyone I speak to, first of all, everybody here, no matter what shul they go to, they love their rabbi. It's an unbelievable thing that everybody loves their rabbi. And if you don't think that's a big deal, you're missing it, because that is so special about this community. And you know, when I walked in and I saw this screen behind me, I got it right away. This is it. Ki ish echad b'lev echad. You know, that's the famous Rashi when the Jewish people were camping out at Mount Sinai waiting for the Torah to come. It says Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. The Jewish people camped out. Now it says it Vayichan, not Vayachanu. It says they camped in the singular. And Rashi says, well, at that moment, at Mount Sinai, even though there were hundreds of thousands of people, they were like one person with one heart. And as much as any community can lay claim to that, being one person with one heart, it's here in Boca Raton. So again, kol hakavod to all of you. It's a beautiful community. And I want to thank my friend, Pastor Mario, all his work that he's done for the Latino Council for Israel. Mario, along with Rabbi Goldberg, both of them were with me when we opened up our embassy in Jerusalem in May of 2018. And Pastor Mario and I go back to 2016 when he introduced me to a number of his colleagues. Until that point, I knew nothing about the evangelical community, really nothing. And Pastor Mario and some others made my acquaintance as I was then advising candidate Donald Trump on Israel. And he introduced me to a distinguished group of ministers representing millions of parishioners with a deep and unconditional love for Israel. I was actually floored. People with, I think the key word really is just unconditional, people with just a love of Israel, millions of people. And I said to myself, this is, you know, I'm used to, you know, the Jewish community, there are 50 million of us in the whole world. You know, we had 18 million in 1941, we dropped down to 12 after the Holocaust, and we've only come about halfway back. I mean, even now, there's only about 15 million Jews. And so the idea that there were 50, 70, 80, 100 million Christians just in the United States alone, let alone South America and all throughout the world, for whom they truly believe that God will bless those who bless Israel, and they live that life every day. So I saw something very special. And then Pastor Mary and I got to work on the Israel platform at the Republican National Convention in 2016. Platforms generally are aspirational, but this one, it was really meaningful because it set the stage for the next 4 years. The Republican platform for Israel in 2016 is the most pro-Israel platform written by any party ever. And by the time we finished in 2020, everything we wrote on that platform, we actually were able to achieve. So. The policies that we were able to implement, the support we got from millions and millions of evangelical Christians led by Pastor Mario and so many others, it made a big difference, it really did. Thanks to my friend Ben Shapiro for being here, Ben. Good to see you. I think it's the first time we're actually appearing on anything together. I'm looking forward to it. At a time when all of us are kind of scratching our heads about the path that our nation is taking, more than ever, I think Ben has been an incredible voice of clarity, of wisdom, of principles, of reason. And most of all, of truth, and it's deeply appreciated. And Ellie, you stole my joke. I was going to congratulate you on your book, Why Iranians Can't Ski, but you took that from me. But thank you for, Ellie and I worked together when we were both in the State Department, and it's great to see you continuing really your brilliant work in the defense of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, so thank you. Let me just say one more thing before I just kind of get into the substance of what I want to talk about. This is an Orthodox synagogue, but not everybody here is Orthodox, not everybody here is even Jewish. We're here as a diverse community of Jews and Christians, all united by our unconditional love and support for the state of Israel. Theologically, we walked into this room in different places, and I have no doubt we're going to walk out of this room no different, in different theological places. But we will all be strengthened by our common belief in the sanctity and the importance and the holiness of the state of Israel. And as we say, I assume we say in the synagogue, I don't want to be presumptuous, but on my guess we probably do, that Israel is the Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Do we say that? We do, right? I have no doubt, yeah. Okay. Israel is, for all of us, the beginning of the redemption of the world. And God willing, that process will continue. In a world in which unity behind the Jewish state is so hard to find, we need to celebrate that unity tonight and to see it for the blessing that it truly is. So welcome all of us, no matter where you came from, no matter which pew you sit in. Thank you all for being here, and it's deeply important. So one of the most common forms of anti-Semitism in America is the accusation that Jews have dual loyalty, that they somehow support Israel more than America. In the 4 years that I was the ambassador to Israel, I was on the receiving end of that terrible canard more than a few times, and oddly enough, even probably more often actually by groups of Jewish Americans than others. And it's shameful, and it's nonsense. And not only does support for Israel by American Jews not compromise or undermine support by Jewish Americans of their host country. Support for Israel is actually a quintessential American value, and I'm going to get a little deeper into that. Exactly. I'm standing here in the presence, right behind me are, I'm sure, some very, very beautiful holy Torah scrolls. The Torah, as you all know, represents the 5 books of Moses, the first and most sacred part of the Bible. I think the Bible is God's gift to humanity. It is the formula for how to lead a just, fulfilling, and meaningful life. And by many accounts, certainly by my account, it is the most important written work of all time. Now, what's in second place? We could debate that all night, and we're not going to. But I'm going to make a suggestion as to the second most significant, at least in my mind, written work that is known to man. And I'm excluding the rest of the Bible. So we'll put the Bible all in one bucket and now look for second place. I think the second most significant document ever written was the United States Declaration of Independence. And let me tell you why. Because that brilliant document fundamentally changed the way in which we think about the relationship between a government and its citizens. The Declaration of Independence provided that every human being was created equal and endowed by their Creator. Remember those words, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. You all know what they are: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The notion that essential human rights came from God and not from man was a revolutionary concept. It made those rights permanent, made them undeniable, made them non-negotiable, and ideally, it made them immune from the vagaries of politics. Now, how did our founding fathers, how did they know which rights were considered to be unalienable? How did they know what God considered to be the critical, unalienable rights? Remember, the Declaration of Independence doesn't say these are important rights or valuable rights. The Declaration of Independence says these rights were ordained by God. Well, our founding fathers knew that because they read the Bible. There's no question that the American Republic was sculpted from the lessons of the Bible. Not surprisingly, all the unalienable rights identified in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, find their home in the Bible itself. Let's take a quick look. Start with life. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. A stronger endorsement of life you will find nowhere else. How about liberty? Leviticus 25:10. And you shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land until all the inhabitants thereof. Well, we know this verse was high within the consciousness of our founding fathers because those words adorn the Liberty Bell, which was inscribed about 30 years before the Declaration of Independence. Happiness, so many references in the Bible. Here's one, Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 11. And you shall be happy in all the good that the Lord your God has given to you in your household, you, the Levite, and the stranger who dwells in your midst. It's all there in the Bible. Undoubtedly the single strongest influence, probably the only influence, on the drafters of the Declaration of Independence. Many believe, certainly our founding fathers believed, that the word of our Creator, the word of God, is expressed in the Bible. And they read those words and they drafted the Declaration of Independence. Now, from where did the word of God emerge? From where? What's the geography behind these words that our founding fathers were so focused upon? Well, the answer is very clear. It's in the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu in the Jewish faith, all recognized as a prophet in all three great monotheistic faiths. Isaiah gives us the answer. He says, out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'davar Hashem miYerushalayim. In this synagogue, those words are said, let's see, twice on Saturday, once on Monday, once on Thursday, Rosh Chodesh, festivals. I mean, it said a lot. And that's it, the word of the Lord comes from Jerusalem. It is irrefutable that our great American Republic has its roots in Jerusalem. Never forget that. To understand the connection between the birth of our nation and the city of Jerusalem is to understand all that has transpired since between Israel and the United States. It is to understand why the Pilgrims risked their lives in the 17th century to reach a new world and establish what they refer to as a new Jerusalem. It's to understand why the United States opened its consulate in Jerusalem in 1844, 104 years before the establishment of the State of Israel, at which point the Consul General went to the Jaffa Gate, planted a flag, and said, the United States hereby extends its protection to the Jews of Jerusalem. It's to understand why Mark Twain and Ulysses Grant visited Jerusalem. President Abraham Lincoln told his wife Mary, upon the conclusion of the Civil War, that he'd like to take some time off and travel to Jerusalem. There are those that say those were the very last words that Lincoln said before his death. It's to understand why President Harry Truman caused the United States to be the first nation to recognize the reborn state of Israel in 1948. It's to understand why in 1995, the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate, by overwhelming majorities, the kind of majorities you never ever see anymore, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and mandated that the transfer of our embassy should be made to that city. It's to understand why every president since President Clinton promised to move our embassy to Jerusalem, or at least to maintain its character as the undivided capital of Israel, although only one president kept that promise. And it is to understand why today the United States Embassy proudly stands in the undivided city of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish state. Before leaving office, I officially recognized the city of David in Jerusalem, the place where the biblical kings ruled and the biblical prophets preached. I recognize the city of David as an American heritage site because Jerusalem is so essential to the heritage of the United States. Don't ask me if I got approval to do that because I'm not sure it's legal, but it's there. It's there. America's physical beginnings may be traced back to Plymouth Rock, to Valley Forge, Continental Congress, the Constitutional Convention, the 4th of July, other important points of historical reference. But America's spiritual beginning, its bedrock foundational principles, its understanding of the God-given rights of every human being, that spiritual beginning occurred, in the words of Isaiah, with Devar Hashem Yerushalayim, with the word of the Lord emerging from Jerusalem. Do Jews betray a dual loyalty when they support Israel? Of course not, God forbid. Jews who support Israel stand for the very best of our American heritage and our American values. America is at its best when it supports Israel. It is a value deeply ingrained in our national DNA, and it is a value that I believe has brought America such blessing and such bounty from the Lord. Now, many of us today look to our capital in Washington, D.C. with confusion, with bewilderment, some with disappointment. Who are we as Americans? What have we become? What do we stand for? Where we used to feel such pride and confidence, we're now left with uncertainty and even emptiness. My friends, the answer to this existential crisis in America is not to become a Republican and it's not to become a Democrat. The answer is to return to the Judeo-Christian values upon which America is built. To restore our foundational commitment to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness, and to renew our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the Holy One, blessed be He, as we grow more and more untethered from our values, we grow weaker as a nation. Moses warned us about this. He warned us about this over 3,000 years ago in Deuteronomy 12:8. You are not to do as we are doing here today, with everyone doing whatever seems right in his own eyes. What an apt description of modern times. Everyone doing whatever seems right in their own eyes. We are a blessed nation because we are a nation of laws. We are a nation of values. We are driven by principles of personal responsibility, equality, opportunity, generosity, and accountability. When people ask me, what is the greatest risk to the U.S.-Israel relationship? They say, is it this or that politician, or is it this or that policy? And my answer is that the greatest risk to the U.S.-Israel relationship is that America no longer leads the world, whether because it no longer wishes to lead or because it no longer possesses the moral authority to do so. When we surrendered to the Taliban in Afghanistan, leaving behind our allies, our partners, and even our citizens, we lost part of our moral authority. When we told Vladimir Putin in advance that the United States will offer no military resistance or interference in his threatened takeover of Ukraine, we lose a part of our moral authority. When the United States does business as usual with China and continues to ignore the fact that over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs are being held in concentration camps, we lose a part of our moral authority. When the United States lifts economic sanctions on Iran as the greatest state sponsor of terrorism continues its assault on innocent lives, we lose a part of our moral authority. Do we care about U.S. policy on Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, Judea and Samaria, the Palestinians? Of course we do. But first and foremost, we care that America retain its credibility as a force for good in the world. And to retain that credibility, we need to go back to the basics of our Judeo-Christian values that made us the greatest nation on earth, so well equipped to fulfill God's will. I mentioned earlier about 1 million Muslims in concentration camps in China. It's a horrible thing, and it brings up terrible memories of the unconscionable acts of anti-Semitism that have been taken against the Jewish people. We say never again. Never again will Jews be rounded up and led to their destruction. I believe that we mean it when we say it. But what exactly do we mean? Who's saying never again now when it comes to the persecution of 1 million Muslims in China? Who said never again to protect 3 million Cambodians from Pol Pot, or 11 million Russians killed by Stalin, or 1 million Tutsis killed in the Rwanda genocide? Did anyone say never again? Did that work? Did that work out in any of those places? Did anyone say never again when Bashar Assad started gassing his own people? We say never again, but what does it mean insofar as genocides have continued since the Holocaust? My friends, never again is an important mantra, but for the Jewish people, never again means nothing in the absence of the state of Israel. It is Israel, and it is only Israel, that stands as a guarantor of Jewish survival in a world that is increasingly inhospitable to the Jewish people. It was Israel that rescued Jews from Ethiopia, from the Sudan, from the Soviet Union, and from the tarmac in Entebbe, and elsewhere, wherever Jews are in peril. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, President Trump was in the UK with then Prime Minister Theresa May. And she told him that there was a humanitarian group in Syria, they're called the White Helmets, and they were just about to be slaughtered by Assad's army that was approaching. And she said, you know, we work a lot with this humanitarian group, and the only nation that can save them is Israel. And the president said to her, don't worry, I'll get Friedman on it right away. Thanks a lot. So what followed was a sleepless week of working on a rescue plan. Israel really had no interest in doing this. The last thing they wanted to do was to enter Syria in the middle of a civil war. They'd been out of the war. The Syrians were fighting each other, they weren't fighting Israel, and all of a sudden Israel was being asked to enter Syria and to save 400 humanitarian workers, all of whom, by the way, or I should say none of them had a nice word to say about Israel. These were not Israel's friends, and Israel's being asked to save these 400 humanitarian workers. They did it, at great personal risk. They saved 400 Muslim humanitarian workers, because that's what Israel does. So every now and then someone comes to me and says, you know, I'm not anti-Semitic. I got nothing against Jews, nothing against the Jewish religion. I'm just opposed to Israel. You know, I don't think there should be a Jewish state. Israel should be a state like all others and treat everybody the same. When you hear that, and you hear it all the time, right? It's not an unusual comment. Understand, make no mistake, you're listening to an anti-Semite. An anti-Semite who denies the right of the Jewish people to a single state of their own has no qualms about 20 or more countries that are Muslim states, 20 or more countries that are Christian states, but there can't be a single Jewish state. You're listening to an anti-Semite who seeks to deny the Jewish people, and only the Jewish people, a means of defense against, God forbid, another Holocaust. An anti-Semite too ignorant to know that Israeli Arabs have one of the highest standards of living in the entire Arab world, and an anti-Semite who denies the centrality of the land of Israel to the Jewish faith. When someone says, I have nothing against the Jews, only against Israel, don't buy it. Don't buy it. There is no Judaism without Israel. It is a central tenet of the Jewish faith. The greatest commentator in the Bible, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchok, Rashi, his very first comment on the Bible, in the creation story, the Sefer Bereshit, he asks a question: why does the Bible begin with the story of creation? After all, the Jewish people are people that keep 613 commandments. The first commandment doesn't arise until the book of Exodus, the commandment of observing the new moon, Rosh Chodesh. So why waste everybody's time with the story of creation? It has nothing to do with any of the commandments. And Rashi answers the question as follows. He says, and remember, this is in the 11th century, this is over 1,000 years ago. He says that the nations of the world will challenge the rights of the Jewish people to their promised land. And Rashi says that the way to respond to those nations who would deny the Jews the right to Israel, is to say to them, wait a minute, God created the world. God created the world, and he can convey any part of it to whoever he wants, and God conveyed the land of Israel to the Jewish people. To Rashi, the story of the whole reason for the story of Bereshit, the whole story about, the 7 days of creation, and it's all about one thing. It's title insurance of the Jewish people to their biblical homeland. 1,000 years ago, Rashi saw the nations of the world, and we're no different today. So, we can't separate our faith from the land of Israel. Every prayer book, I checked this out of curiosity. I looked at every prayer book of every Jewish stream to see how they dealt with, I'm familiar with, with the Orthodox stream, where we ask God to return us to Jerusalem, return us to Zion. I wondered, every Jewish stream, the Jews pray to return to Zion, to return to Jerusalem, to return to the land of Israel. And people say, well, you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Well, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can, but that's not the point. The people who are so-called criticizing Israel, they're not even well-versed enough to actually criticize policy or politics. Under the guise of criticism, they seek to deny the rights of the Jewish people to have a state of their own. That is anti-Semitism, nothing more, nothing less. So how do we deal with all this? As someone who's been on the front lines of this for the last 4 or 5 years, a couple of words of advice for what they're worth. Take pride. For those of us who are Jewish, take pride in being Jewish. Never apologize for being Jewish. Never make excuses for being Jewish. Don't be less of a Jew to show that you're even-handed or be more accepted within a secular world. First of all, it's not going to work. It's a waste of time anyway. But be proud in who you are. Show no tolerance for anti-Semitism. Show the same indignation that we see expressed by other peoples who suffer discrimination. Don't defend any less our right to be Jews. In my first month in the State Department, I was almost like the panda in the zoo. Like I was like an anomaly. People were watching me, in Washington, they had this one panda. Everybody used to watch the panda because there was only one of them. And I was this one, super pro-Israel guy in the State Department. Everybody was keeping their eye on me and watching me. And after about a month of people kind of watching, somebody came up to me, a senior person came up to me and said to me, a word of advice: don't be so Jewish. Don't be so Jewish. Now look, the State Department has tens of thousands of people of every single ethnic group you can imagine. And they're all working on countries in which they have some ethnic association. But the laws of political correctness only apply to Jews. The laws of political correctness apply to everyone but Jews, I should say. So anyway, I had her removed from anything that I was working on, and she was never heard from again. But she gave me a good idea. She gave me a good idea. I just reversed it 180 degrees. Instead of telling people, don't be so Jewish, our response was, be Jewish. Be Jewish. Be Jewish. Follow in the footsteps of over 100 generations of our predecessors who led exemplary, meaningful lives. Be Jewish. Continue to pray in the same language, with the same words, in the same place, the land of Israel, as our ancestors did for thousands of years. Be proud of that. And be Jewish whether you're Jewish or not. Be Jewish and bring back the Judeo. See, we're flipping. People thought you were going to convert me. I'm going to convert you. Whether you're Jewish or not, helped to bring back the Judeo-Christian values that made America such a great nation. And live your lives in a manner reflecting the highest ideals of this ancient faith. And finally, be Jewish by showing hakarat hatov, by showing gratitude to our wonderful friends of different faiths who courageously and selflessly support Israel and the Jewish people, including the Latino Council for Israel, which is co-hosting tonight's event. Thank you. Thank you so much. May God bless you. May God bless Israel. May God bless the United States of America.
Ben Shapiro needs no introduction in this room. The Daily Wire, the Ben Shapiro Show, millions of Twitter, Instagram followers, dozens of books, and the list goes on. But he's here tonight for a specific reason. Because he uses that incredible reach and that powerful voice to be an unabashed supporter of Israel. He takes that message on the road to college campuses where the message maybe needs to be heard the most. He wears his yarmulke proudly. He's never ashamed or apologizes. He's always proud to be a Jew, to stand up against anti-Semitism in defense of Israel. Ben, thank you so, so much for being with us this evening. You've already heard from Ambassador Friedman, certainly needs no introduction, but I want to just say a story, even at the risk of my children later accusing me of flexing. In the beginning of the administration, Vice President Pence had unprecedented a Yom Ha'atzmaut event at the White House. And for whatever reason, because we are in a district where our votes matter, I sometimes get invited to these things. So I had the privilege of being there. And I was with a group of rabbis in the White House, and the Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day event ended. When you're in the White House and you don't have the privilege of being there daily, you linger as long as you can. You hang out in the hall. You wait until you're literally escorted out because you want to soak up every moment of being there. So a couple of rabbi friends and I were still standing there, even though the event had been long over. And Ambassador David Friedman walked by, saw us, stopped, and said, "What are you guys waiting for, the Kiddush?" So it's really an extraordinary thing to be up here with the United States Ambassador and one of the most famous and popular media personalities on earth, and feel it's a Kiddush, it's a Hamish gathering up here. It's really something which is extraordinary and we don't take for granted. So I want to begin with the following question to both of you. Ben, in your role, in your show, the positions that you take, you have an enormous following of people who agree, but you have many who disagree with almost everything that you say. An ambassador, in your role in the previous administration, you have many, many supporters and fans and followers, but there are those who are never what you stood for. What would you both say to somebody who disagrees with you on almost everything about why they should agree with you on Israel? To set aside those differences, to put aside what they can't work with you on, and why Israel is different, why Israel matters, why Israel's right, and why they should be with you. Ben, let's start with you.
I mean, first of all, everyone should always agree with me, but beyond that, Israel is a consensus issue, or at least it should be a consensus issue, because it's very difficult to see why it would not be. And one of the more astonishing elements of modern American politics is that this has become a more and more partisan issue over time. When I was growing up, and I'm not that old, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was widely assumed that both parties were going to be at least somewhat equivalently pro-Israel. The Republicans were slightly more right-wing on Israel, and Democrats are slightly more left-wing, but there's a general baseline assumption that everyone is going to be pro-Israel. It doesn't seem like that is the direction in which the parties are moving right now. And frankly, I find it bewildering, except that the argument against Israel is not an independent one. The arguments that people make with regard to opposition to Israel cannot be separated from broader arguments that are generally made about the necessity for quote-unquote fairness and opportunity, because the way that so many people tend to think right now is they believe that if they see one person in a room who has $5 and one person with $1, the person with $5 must have taken the money from the person with $1. And when they look to the Middle East and see that Israel is successful, the idea is that Israel must have done something terrible in order to achieve that success at the expense of the people who are trying to destroy the state of Israel. The only way, I think, to make the case is to get at the root of why people are, in fact, anti-Israel, and also to really assess whether the argument is worth making with people in the first place. I really do believe that every conversation has to be assessed for the possibility that you're wasting your time. And then you really have to assess whether each conversation is worth it. Because if somebody is open to actually knowing about Israel, if somebody's open to learning about Israel, this is such a clear-cut moral case. It is certainly the most morally clear-cut case in any foreign policy issue on earth. You have one country that is a liberal democracy that strives to preserve the lives of even the people who are trying to destroy it. And then you have opposing it a series of terror groups who have been elected some 2 decades ago to serve 4-year terms. It's astonishing that this is even remotely controversial. The fact that it is controversial suggests what I'm saying before, which is that there are deeper issues at play that really need to be argued outside of Israel. Israel is almost a tertiary issue for most of the people who oppose it.
Thank you. Ambassador.
So I agree with Ben. I agree with Ben's observation. I would take it one more step. First of all, there's a lot of people who will never like Israel and can never be made to like Israel because they're not looking for an honest discussion or a rational discussion. But what I would say is the more important thing is not to convince people who don't like Israel to like Israel. The more important thing is to convince people who are, especially Jewish people, especially people who are lost right now, not why they shouldn't be against Israel, why they should be for Israel. And my views are not uniformly accepted, but I start with I was comfortable saying this even when I was a public servant. I start with the notion that Israel's a miraculous place. It is derived from a ordained biblical promise that the Jewish people would be restored to their ancient homeland, and it happened. It happened against all odds, and the first thing that at least Jewish people should do, and Christian people should do, is they should see the miracle, and they should understand the history. It's a 3,000-year-old history. There is no other people. The Phoenicians are gone. The Nabateans are gone. And we're the only ones left. And I think once you understand that, and you understand that you're on a multi-thousand-year continuum, and we don't want to break the chain. That I think is the starting place, because without that, it's just another country, and it's the same political nonsense we talk about all day long.
If we can for a moment, we're going to applaud that. 100%. So well said. If we can go a person a little bit behind the bima for a moment, with both of you, in different arenas and with different risks. You both are staunch advocates for Israel, unapologetic, unabashed, eloquent spokespeople for Israel. In the halls of the State Department, Ambassador, as you just spoke about, not a popular place to be maybe Jewish, let alone or pro-Israel, and the media, which leans in a certain direction. And it's not so easy or popular, and those who've seen the videos in college campus and security tonight looks like nothing compared to what you need in some of those environments. And yet you choose to do it. You speak the truth, you stand up, and you're on the front lines of fighting in the arena of politics and in the arena of the media. Where does that come from? Who inspired you? Who motivated you? Was there a person? Was it a family member, a teacher? Was it a trip to Israel? Was it a place in Israel? Where does that resolve come from that gives you the courage to stand up when both of you could advance your careers without making Israel one of those top issues? Ben.
So first of all, I have to say that I'm sure that Ambassador Friedman and I are going to say very much the same sort of things here, especially because the first time that I actually met Ambassador Friedman was in Israel a few years ago. It was right before the opening of the embassy. We were actually privileged to visit his office before the opening of the embassy, and he showed me a picture on his wall by a very elderly Jerusalem-living woman in Huvi, as beautiful painting of the Meraglim who are bringing back the fruits of the land of Israel, and it's right before they're about to announce that that the Jews should not enter the land of Israel. And Ambassador Friedman, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, because you were there. But I remember you suggesting that the reason you had that on your wall is to remind yourself to have courage, that it was the lack of courage of the Meraglim that led to 40 years in the wilderness. So have courage and make that move. I know, and 2 pieces of art from Hoopy, thanks to that also, by the way. Yeah. So for me, the idea of having courage as a Jew, I will say on a specific personal level, is derived from my father, who bears. If you ask him what his Judaism is about, it's about loyalty to the Jewish people and loyalty to an unbroken chain of Jewish history that he does not want to be the one to break, and he feels a real duty to push that forward into the next generations. I certainly feel that same duty. On a sort of day-to-day level, honestly, it's something that I don't think about. People ask me why I wear a yarmulke in public life, and the answer is, why wouldn't I wear a yarmulke in public life? I remember when I was 17 years old, and I was thinking about wearing a yarmulke on TV or not. I remember my father said, "Are you sure you want to wear a yarmulke on TV? You want to give me the choice?" And I said, "Well, I've been wearing it so far. I don't see what's going wrong thus far." And so it never was sort of an option not to take off the kippah. And I think that it's worthwhile approaching. It's funny. In Judaism, it's seen as a bad thing to be casual about your Judaism, because you shouldn't be casual about your Judaism. But the truth is that when you live life on a daily level, you're always casual about the things that you do on a daily level. Well, we should be just as casual on a daily level about being proud Jews as we are about being proud Jews in the community where we live.
You mentioned being there for the embassy opening. Is there a particular trip or a particular place in Israel that stands out for you when you go to Israel that you're most excited about or that you walk away most inspired?
Well, the place that is still controversial for anyone to mention is going up on Har Bayit. So I did. I went to Mikvah, I went up on Har Bayit. I think the Jews should go up on Har Bayit. It's controversial territory. But I believe that we should, frankly, I think we should build a shul on Har Bayit. It seems to me if they have a dome in mosque, and having a shul up on Har Bayit is not a bad idea. To say anything except for the holiest site of Judaism, which is not in fact the Kotel, but is in fact Har Bayit, would be a mistake.
Okay, Ambassador, where does your passion come from?
So I said that once, and I started a riot when I was ambassador. So I'm not going to say it again. It didn't work out well the first time. Look, I am my father's son. My father was a pulpit rabbi for 50 years. My parents, I remember them crying in early June of 1967 when Jerusalem was reunited. They immediately made plans for my bar mitzvah at the Kotel, even though they had 4 years to plan. They started planning immediately. In 1973, my father, we heard on Yom Kippur, we heard that there was a war that began in Israel, and we were getting, I remember we were getting news that the Syrians were going down, had already breached the Golan Heights, and the Egyptians were already halfway into the Sinai. And my father, who actually had on Yom Kippur, his congregation was about twice the size of this. Imagine that. And after Ne'ilah, he told all the ushers to close the doors, not to let anybody out. These are hungry Jews, remember? Hungry Jews. Very dangerous to get between hungry Jews and their food, right? And he said, lock the doors, and we don't leave until we raise, I think in those days it was probably $250,000, but we raised $250,000. I understand that Israel's very low on supplies. We raise that money, and then he can go home and eat. And I remember people were saying, is he violating the fire code? Can he do this? He didn't care. He didn't care. Look, it had a deeper influence on me, and very, and I tell this to my friends in Israel all the time. The world will respect us when we respect ourselves. We must respect ourselves first, and then all things will go.
Maybe the ambassador's residence is your favorite place in Israel now. Obviously, having just spent a long time there, you saw many places, had many experiences. Particular place in Israel stand out for you?
Yes, it also almost caused a riot, but I happen to love Hebron. Okay. As I like to say, it's the first transaction recorded. It's a real estate transaction by a Jew who paid retail. The last time a Jew paid retail for a piece of real estate. I think he overpaid actually. So it means a lot to me, yeah.
The Romans are wonderful and the holy site. Ben, you tweeted something a few days ago that really touched me. A professor of yours from law school passed away, and you wrote that even though in the classroom you disagreed on absolutely everything, and you battled vociferously on those issues, but you had a wonderful relationship outside the classroom. She actually wrote you a recommendation or used her as a reference, and that she was a lovely person who had nice things to say. You know, we're living in a world where, whether it's on the topic of Israel or so many other topics, people who disagree can't do so agreeably. They're unable to say kind things or have a relationship, and therefore it stunts our growth as people and as a community. Israel is that hot button issue that so many people are divided on, and it causes people to stop talking. So how can we overcome that? Even the people that we can't persuade, how can we use our language to ensure that Israel and other things don't become divide issues that send us apart? How can we maintain our humanity, our connection, our community? It's sad because that memory was from a long time ago. I wonder if there's anyone more recently that you could send that tweet about. It seems today that the people we disagree with, we vilify, we distance, we reject, and we have trouble connecting. So I'd love to hear, as a diplomat, where language matters and you have to be able to negotiate with people who are different, in a media world where you have relationships with people who you disagree with a lot, how can we overcome that to create some headway and some unity?
Well, I mean, I was at a conference fairly recently, this was last year, and there were a bunch of people. I was probably the only conservative at the conference. 400 people, these are some of the top people in virtually every industry. I think everybody there was pretty much a household name, and this topic came up, of political polarization in the United States. And I said, we can solve political polarization right now in this room. All you all have to do is take out your phones and go on Twitter and name a person who voted differently than you did in the last election and say they're a nice human being and I enjoy getting coffee with them. That's literally all you have to do. No one did it, of course, because to do so means that you're going to receive an extraordinary amount of blowback from your own side. Now, I've done this. I mean, I literally performed this exercise 6-7 months ago, where I tweeted out just an entire list of people who are on the left, with whom I feel like I'm friendly and they're nice people, and we disagree on a lot of issues, but we can still respect each other's right to exist. I do think that is dying. I do think that it is largely predominantly unidirectional at this point, and I think that is a real abiding problem. It comes down to what I've called before the happy birthday problem. I have a lot of friends on the left. I'm happy to say happy birthday to them publicly. They will text me privately, happy birthday, but will never say happy birthday publicly for fear of the admission that I was born a woman. The answer is, as always, if you treat people with a certain amount of decency publicly and treat them as though you know them, as opposed to when you're online, then you'll do better. I will say that, to quote one of my friends, Dennis Prager, when it comes to the state of Israel, when it comes to deep-seated issues, clarity has to be prized above agreement. And clarity has to be prized, in some cases, even above civility. And when it comes to existential issues, like, for example, the existence of the state of Israel, those are issues where if somebody is offended and you lose a friend over it, frankly, so be it. There are certain core issues that really, I think, are worth losing friends over, and that is one of them. There can be differences of opinion about specific policies of the Israeli government. It's another thing to argue that the state of Israel should not exist. Once that happens, it's very difficult to carry on a conversation in good faith.
Ambassador.
We've lost a good deal of our civility, of our dignity, of our humanity. By the way, it's hard for me to watch the Knesset, with people screaming at each other, coming almost to blows. It's the views are all heartfelt, but you can't move forward when you're vilifying, and it's harder for me in Israel because I like to think that the Jewish people could overcome at least their ability to deal with each other on a human level. Frankly, Rabbi, this is where you come in, because Ben's not going to solve this problem, and I'm not going to solve this problem. I'm not switching sides, and he's not switching sides, and we're not reaching out to the point where we're going to undercut all that we believe in. But there's an arbiter of all these disputes, right? And it's God. God ultimately has the truth, and the truth is expressed, by those scrolls that are behind us, and by those who communicate God's teachings. And it's a lot easier. Anybody can argue with Ben Shapiro or David Friedman. Much harder to argue with God. You don't want to pick a fight with God. And so your ability to study Torah and to learn with people and to get them to sort of understand what God wants of all of us, I think is the last best chance we have.
Thank you. You're both very publicly observant Jews. You're religious in your practice, unapologetic for it. Tell us a little bit about what religion, that relationship with Hashem, with God means to you. You just referenced the importance of Torah study. Could you share about setting time aside, or what you study, or how you continue to listen to the voice of God through studying His Torah? Is there something that stands out, Ambassador?
Look, I think there's, for my job, the Tanakh is so incredibly informative, helpful, useful. You study, especially, the books of Joshua, of Judges, of Samuel, of King David, Solomon. I mean, so when I took a course in Bible when I was in Columbia, the professor said, if you just read this stuff, you would think that whoever wrote the Bible was an anti-Semite, because all the sins of the Jewish people are laid bare. There's no mythology here. There's no attempt to cover up and you see how people's human failings can undercut everything that they want to do, in the public sphere. And so, to me, it spoke to me really in terms of the need to really lead I'm sure that I've sinned a million times and I will continue to do so, but at least I tried to think, what are the lessons, especially when the prophets, especially the lessons of the prophets really spoke to me. In the words of Moses when he was about to pass away, and really just sort of the enormous criticism he had for the Jewish people and what they've done wrong. And I said, well, we've got a real blueprint here for the mistakes we shouldn't make. We'll make other mistakes, but let's try to stay away from sort of these human failings that we've been inculcated with. We all have pride. We all have desires. We all have needs. But we need to control them, and God tells us how, and that really did speak to me.
Beautiful. Ben.
So I study once a week with you. I study once a week with Rabbi Goldberg. And then I do a lot of reading on my own, but I would say that my chief focus, like Ambassador Friedman's, is on Tanakh itself. The deep and abiding wisdom of the Chumash is just extraordinary, and and that's felt not just by Jews, I think. I mean, it's felt obviously by Christians, but it's felt by non-religious people as well. Thomas Sowell is fond of suggesting that the sort of knowledge that we prize in modern society is so-called scientific knowledge. Right? It's been tested, it's been verified, but the truth is that wisdom that has been passed down over the course of ages has also been tested and verified. If something lasts the test of 3,000 years and it's passed down with such unbelievable care, this treasure that's been passed down bears extraordinary amounts of wisdom. And that wisdom is accessible to anybody who can pick up a book, unlike somebody who requires a scientific degree in order to understand what's going on in a particular scientific text. You don't need a scientific degree to be able to pick up the Chumash and understand the stories of our forefathers and understand the stories of Bereshit, which I think virtually all wisdom about human nature can be found in probably the first 10 parakim of Bereshit. And human beings don't change. Because human beings don't change, that means that the words of the Torah remain eternal.
So, big recommendation tonight. Everybody pick up your Tanakh, Bible, and study it every day. It will inform you. It'll keep you grounded. We're going to head towards the end with just two more questions. One is, tonight is really about standing with Israel and standing against anti-Semitism. Ambassador, you spoke about this a little bit in your keynote address, the connection between the two. So then we'll start with you. What's the connection between Israel and anti-Semitism? Are those parallel issues? Are they overlapping issues?
I mean, there's certainly overlapping issues. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs recently suggested, before he passed away, he did a video in which he explained the connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments. He said that if you are seeking to destroy the state of Israel, which is a repository of some 6 million Jews, 7 million Jews at this point, that can't be seen as anything other than an attempt to destroy Jews. If you're talking about the central gathering place for all Jews and you say this should not exist, it should go away, it's hard to read that as anything other than Jew hatred. There really, I think, when it comes to anti-Semitism, 3 theories of anti-Semitism that are out there and that have been historically present. One is religious anti-Semitism, so various religions suggesting that Judaism is bad or wrong. That has, at this point centralized, I would say, in sort of the fundamentalist Islamic community. Then you have the idea of racial anti-Semitism, which really rose post-Darwin with the Nazis. You can still find crossover with that with some folks who are on the far right in European politics and also in fundamentalist Islamic countries. And then there is a sort of left-wing anti-Semitism, which is tied into that theory I suggested before. It's almost a conspiracy theory about power, which is that anyone who has power must have done something wrong in order to obtain that power, and therefore all power relations must be flattened out. And then if you apply that to Jews broadly, or if you apply that to Israel specifically, Jews tend to be disproportionately wealthy, they tend to be disproportionately well educated, and Israel is disproportionately wealthy and well educated, which means they must have done something wrong. So the sort of intersectional conspiracy theory that is represented in American politics has consequences for foreign policy as well. You can see how all of these things cross streams with hatred for Israel. It's hated for its racial composition, and its ethnic composition, it's hated for its religious composition, and it's hated for its success.
You mentioned before that it's legitimate to criticize policies, but not the existence. So you can name a particular policy that you're against, or without speaking specifically, how would one do that? How could you acknowledge there's a policy you disagree with without it being an expression of anti-Semitism?
I mean, it really isn't that difficult. We do it in the United States all the time. We criticize politicians all the time for policies they're pursuing without saying, also, we don't think the United States of America ought to exist. Right? But people seem to have trouble with that with regard to Israel. It's amazing to me. I was traveling fairly recently, some domestically and a little bit outside the country, and it's incredible the double standard that is applied to Jews in the United States. So, for example, South Florida obviously is a heavy Cuban population. The Cuban population here has deep roots with Cuba and deep loyalty to Cuba, and they want to see Cuba liberated, which it should be. Right? God willing, it will be liberated at some point in the near future. Nobody in American politics ever suggests that Cuban Americans have dual loyalty, because that's absurd. Of course they don't have dual loyalty. The same liberty that motivates them in the United States motivates them with regard to Cuba. When it comes to various countries around the world that have actual ethnic requirements for example, gaining citizenship. There's some of that in, for example, the Bahamas. Nobody ever mentions that with regard to the Bahamas because who cares? Right? When it comes to Israel and the right of Jews to return to the land of Israel and gain citizenship, somehow this is wildly out of the box. The double standard that is applied to Jews, to Israel, now the State Department has said for years that represents a form of anti-Semitism, and it does represent a form of anti-Semitism. So there's really a couple of types of critiques of Israel that are anti-Semitism. One is Israel does not have the right to exist as a Jewish state. The second is Israel ought to be criticized for things no other country would be criticized for, and you see those all the time.
Ambassador, in your case, I know there was some resistance from your named ambassador, that an observant Jew or a Jew who's been in lay leadership position of organizations that State Department or mainstream maybe opinion disagrees with. So how have you experienced personally in that rise and in the role that you played, some of that overlap between Israel and anti-Semitism?
Look, I was fighting from the day I started until the day I left, fighting somebody, and tried not to lose. Winning's better than losing. So tried, and I had great support. I had, the reality is when you have the President of the United States supports you, likes you, trusts you, gives you out of authority, you're not going to lose. It's not me. It's that I was given a huge amount of authority. But I had a very I would say Ben gave the 180 IQ answer before. I'm going to give like the 110 IQ, answer, which is very simple. Judaism is in large part about the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. That's what Judaism is. There was a time back in the late 19th century when you had the Pittsburgh platform with the Reform movement, and then they wanted to assimilate into America, and they said that we no longer hold any aspirations to return to our homeland. But that was quickly dispersed once after the Holocaust. And everybody agrees that Judaism, no matter where you live, Judaism is in large part about the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So if you do not support the state of Israel, you do not support Judaism, therefore you're anti-Semitic. That's my 110 IQ answer to your question. Simple.
Finally, with tremendous gratitude to both of you for being here. Finally, tell us, ladies and gentlemen, Boca Raton, this is not simple. The United States Ambassador, Ben Shapiro, an audience, an amazing evening. There's a lot to be grateful for. So last question. Give us something positive. Tell us something you're optimistic about Israel. about the U.S.-Israel relationship, about the world's support for Israel. We tend to get together at these evenings, these celebrations, these nights, and the way they're successful, you get people there. Certain Jewish organizations thrive on this. Is every year you got to describe Israel as facing the most threats it's ever faced. It's the worst news it's ever had. It's most on the brink that it's ever been. And that's how you get people to come, and that's how you get people to join, and so on. So we're used to hearing the bad news, and there's no shortage of it. Give us some good news. What are you optimistic about? Certainly the Abraham Accords and the changes that happened in your administration and that hopefully, please God, will be built upon are extraordinary. They're historic, and hopefully tell us something more that's happening in that arena. Ben, from what you see and what we know from you publicly, but also what you're experiencing behind the scenes, give us something to be excited, positive, and optimistic about. Ambassador.
Well, first I'll tell you what I told the Knesset in my final words to them. They were nice enough to have me over, and I offered a few words. And I said this. I said, the Jewish world now resides in Israel. It's no longer, the Jews are no longer a majority in the diaspora, they're a majority in Israel. I said to everyone in the Knesset, it's now your responsibility to protect us. It's not our responsibility anymore to support you, it's your responsibility to protect us. Israel is fine. I'm on the side, I'm in the private equity business. I look at businesses in Israel, the prices are insane. Israel raised $25.5 billion of equity capital in their businesses. Tel Aviv is the most expensive city in the entire world. The Jews in Israel are doing fine. It's an amazing country. They got a great army. It's beautiful. It's got great weather. People are doing fine. We're not doing so fine. They're doing fine. And we have to support Israel, but most importantly, we have to support Israel because that's the future for all of us.
So like Ambassador Friedman, I'm going to mirror wild optimism about the state of Israel itself. Israel has never been in better position than it is now, largely thanks to the efforts of Ambassador Friedman and the Trump administration. The Abraham Accords are an extraordinary game changer. He's not going to tout his own work, so I will. The Abraham Accords are an extraordinary game changer. It is the first time that there's been a ground shift in the nature of understanding about Israel's relations with its neighbors. There was the going theory for decades, and it was a lie. And everything in the Middle East was stagnant because of Israel versus the Palestinians. That was obviously proved to be a lie. It turns out that countries surrounding Israel also wish to have economic opportunity. They wish to have common defense. And ironically, thanks to President Obama's embrace of Iran, all of these countries realized that perhaps the chief threat didn't lie with the Jews in Israel, it lay, in fact, with the mullahs in Iran, and they started to form alliances with Israel. That is only going to increase and expand as it becomes more and more effective over time. That's an extraordinary thing. So on the foreign front, Israel is doing better than it ever has in my lifetime, and I can tell you that, and I'm sure Ambassador Friedman would mirror this, there are many other countries that would love to have jumped on the Abraham Accords, and if Donald Trump had been reelected, would have. I mean, there are certainly, he can't say it, so again, I will. The country that comes to mind here is Saudi Arabia, which almost certainly would have normalized relations if President Trump had been reelected, and may in fact normalize relations anyway. Then there is the domestic situation in Israel. Obviously, everything has been held up by the insanity of having an election every 2.5 days. And the bizarre COVID policy of playing the hokey pokey with opening and closing its borders, and getting people jabbed until 80% of their body weight is made up of the vaccine. Listen, vaccines are good. I just don't want 80% of my body weight made up of it. You put all that aside, the simple fact is that Israel underwent a ground shift after the Gaza pullout in which the left no longer exists in Israel. The Labor Party, which used to win elections on a regular basis, is now a fringe, tiny party. The left-wing party in Israel is actually a center-wing party in Israel in Kahol Lavan. If you measure it out, right now in Israel, about 80 of the 120 seats are considered center to right in Israel. Why? Because Israel recognized in the entire Israeli population in the aftermath of the Gaza pullout and the subsequent Gaza war, recognized that there was an existential threat that was not going to be solved purely by Israeli concessions, and that there was very little debate over foreign policy. This is what shocked the world. For those of us who were watching politics, I mean, Ambassador Friedman wasn't shocked by it, I wasn't shocked by it. When Naftali Bennett became prime minister and foreign policy didn't shift one iota, nobody really should have been shocked by that. But of course the press was, because the idea was that Bibi Netanyahu was the big baddie, as opposed to the real fact of the matter, which is that Israel faces down existential threats on its border. Its entire population understands this, and they're not playing games with that anymore. Israel, despite all of the insane sort of arguments they have with each other, is significantly more cohesive as a population than the United States is right now. There's more agreement on centralized principle for what the State of Israel is and can be. And I mean, if I have one piece of advice for the State of Israel, lower your corporate tax rate to 10% and you'll eat everybody's lunch on planet Earth. The only reason more people aren't investing in a place with the unbelievable intellectual capital that Israel is because they have an insane tax regulatory structure. So, you know, as far as opportunity, like, again, I'm extraordinarily, you know, positive on the future of the State of Israel. If Israel were able to do that economically speaking, it would also ensure their survivability for generations to come, because it turns out that the world runs on power, and Israel has never had oil, but Israel does have unbelievable intellectual capital and technological advancements. You make yourself more vital, and just like Vladimir Putin can run half of Western Europe by opening a pipeline, Israel can have enormous world weight by opening its technology sphere to broader investment. As far as the United States and world support, again, the stronger Israel is, it's just like, as Ambassador Friedman was saying about Jews on a personal level, the stronger you are, the more respect people have for you. And the stronger Israel is, the more people will have respect for the State of Israel. The less Israel goes with its hand out to the rest of the world seeking solace and comfort, the less the rest of the world will feel bad giving it, is sort of my view. So it's not a stretch to say I'm optimistic. I'm wildly optimistic about what Israel does over the course of the next couple decades.
What a great note to end a great evening on. Optimism, positivity. The best is yet to come for the State of Israel, the people of Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship. We're so grateful to all of you for coming tonight. It means the world. But the work was not coming here tonight and listening. It was a long evening, but all worthwhile. That's the easy part. The work is when we leave. There's a lot more to do. There's a lot more to advocate for. We talked about specific causes that we hope to have to hold Congress accountable for, that all aid to Palestinians should be conditioned on the return of the bodies of Hadar Golden and Aaron Shaul. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's a cost to our doing this work, putting together this evening and future projects that we're working on and that we're working on together. So if you find in your hearts on your way out, there's a table, there's an opportunity to give. We have costs that we need to cover, and there's work that needs to be done, and we need your help. None of us are benefiting personally, and we're not getting rich from it. We simply want to continue to advance this agenda. So again, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Pastor Mario Bramnick, the Latino Coalition for Israel, for their partnership this evening. Thank all of you for being here. Enormous thank you to Ambassador Friedman, not just for tonight. Ambassador Friedman, we had fun tonight, but there were 4 years that were probably not so fun all the time. Your leadership, your work, your heroism, you are a part of history, and tonight we are so deeply indebted. Ben, your friendship, your leadership, your being that voice for Israel and many other topics of moral clarity and truth. Thank you for all that you do on a daily basis. Thank you for being here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight, a night celebrating Israel. We're going to lead us out on one more song. So one more song. Following this final song, there'll be Maariv, the women's section.
גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד. כולם, והעיקר לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר
If you can send me some of these pictures. Thank you.
Thank you.